Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sponsor CX webinar, Cultural Marketing versus Passion Marketing, why the distinction is important for brands and properties. I am particularly excited to introduce you to our guest today. Her name is Aubrey. She is the Global Brand Director, Brand Collaborations and Cultural Marketing for the Lego Group. And I have known Bree, we were just talking about this. It's been, we can't believe it, about 8 years. We first met, Bree was actually here in Chicago. She was living and working here. I hesitate to start telling all of you about the different things that she has done in a relatively short amount of time. But briefly, I'll just mention that, again, when you were in Chicago, Bree, you worked at Nielsen, you were at Intersport. When I met you, you also, I don't know how, in your quote unquote free time, ran a very successful agency, a cultural marketing agency called Black Thread, producing events, working on numerous brand collaborations, just a whole bunch of stuff. You were on the revenue producing side of partnerships for a little while with 100 Thieves in the gaming space. Then on the brand side, working for JP Morgan Chase, where you worked with some iconic sports and entertainment properties, Steph Curry, Kevin Hart, Atlanta Hawks. We all know that portfolio. And then a year ago, decided to cross the Atlantic, move to Denmark, and go to work for the Lego Group. So lots of great experience, and like I said, in a short amount of time. But really, it's not so much, we're not here to talk so much about kind of career highlights and what you're doing now, but just, you and I talk regularly, and I am always, I walk away from our conversations just like feeling like educated and enlightened, because I just think you have a really unique perspective on marketing in general and brand marketing, but certainly cultural marketing, which is what we're here to talk about. So I felt that it was like, hey, I always walk away from those conversations knowing a lot more. I want to share that with the Sponsor CX webinar audience, and you have been gracious enough to join us at the dinner hour in Copenhagen. So appreciate you doing that. So yeah, and I should mention too, you just coming off a stint as the first time, I think for you, judge at the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity and Advertising in France a couple weeks ago. I haven't talked to you since then, so I'm just personally interested in what that experience was like for you. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were involved in there?
Yeah, first of all, really excited to be here and talk through everything. Culture marketing is something that I'm very, very passionate about. But I got to bring that to actually Cannes Lions recently. So I was asked to be a judge for the Glass Align for Change Award. So that one is more focused on impact versus just the creative output. So impact and creativity, and it's usually coming in from whether it's brand or non-for-profits or organizations that are specifically focused on society and change and really connecting it to impact. But yeah, it was great. First time ever being a judge. It would meet amazing jury from all around the world and learning more about, like, from a cultural perspective and having all those voices at the table. We actually ended up awarding a Brazilian focused creative initiative called Nigrum Corpus that was focused on a clinical manifesto and like visual manual that expressed like structural racism within the medical field, specifically around Black patients. So it was an amazing piece of work in which they were going through patients' files and former history to determine anything that has been maybe misdiagnosed or maybe didn't have a name, but put a name for it, and then educating the next generation of medical students and doctors within Brazil. So that gives you a little bit of a taste of the type of work that comes through there. So it was visually beautiful, but the impact of that was like long lasting beyond just Brazil, but from a global perspective. So it was an amazing time.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. We talk about, cultural marketing, but then there's, and I hate all this jargon, but purpose marketing in that case. But that's really, that sounds like a clear demonstration of how, you can really be effective and make a difference with a campaign like that. So incredible.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah. So before we start, let me just say to the audience a couple of things. I think, again, my goal for this webinar is really, again, to have you hear from Bree and hear her perspective on this topic, but also we want to create space for you to ask questions. As it pertains to your particular situations, the organizations you work for. So there is that on the right-hand side of your screen, that Q&A area. So feel free at any point to go ahead and, as we're talking in the beginning here, if you want to throw a question in there, I might take some on the fly, or I might save some towards the end, depending on how the conversation is going. But whenever you feel like asking a question, we would love to have your involvement. We want to make this relevant to you as well. And I know we've got folks from different parts of the typically the sports and entertainment sectors where Sponsor CX does a lot of great work. But again, feel free to put those questions in the Q&A part. So, Bree, I want to start off with just kind of a basic question. And again, you and I've had conversations along these lines. But to me, and you've raised this, there is a great deal of confusion over the term culture as it relates to marketing. I mean, we hear it all the time, and we are an industry that, as I mentioned before, is chock full of buzzwords and terminology, and a lot of times people use things in different ways. So, but for someone who has been in this space, you have cultural marketing literally in your title. How do you define cultural marketing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it has been defined in so many different ways that I think, if you ask this question to about 10, 15 different people, you might get different answers. So I'll speak specifically about myself, even beyond this role, of how I view it and how I approach when I'm doing cultural marketing. I think when I think about cultural marketing, I have to break it apart. I focus on the word culture first, and then marketing as the action. So for me, culture is really, it's the fabric of society on a larger scale. But on another scale, it's the fabric of a community, right? So it's the collection of their beliefs, their values, their behaviors, their rituals, their symbols, what they think is normal and or not. But it's very fluid. It can change, it can evolve, it can be positive, it can be negative, depending on the perception and the perspective of it. So when I think of that definition, and I think of cultural marketing, I think it's the action of it. And when I look at it from a brand perspective or a cultural marketer perspective, it's aligning a brand or a product or service with beliefs and values and behaviors that they're trying to contribute to, right? They're contributing to it with purpose. They know what the brand stands for. They know what they're participating in. They know what they are adding to. So it's beyond just from a trend perspective, but it's a long-term goal of what am I standing for from a brand perspective, and taking everything that I do from campaigns to creative to ensure that that messaging and that belief and that values is coming through.
That makes a lot of sense. My thought about that when you talk about especially kind of that long term is, and we'll talk about some of the pitfalls and things to watch out for, but immediately when in response to what you just said, it's like, is one of the challenges the fact that culture is very fluid and changes. I mean, certainly there are underlying things that are the bedrocks of culture, but does that make it challenging because it is ever changing?
I mean, for sure. I mean, one day you could wake up and it's not allowed anymore, or it's not accepted within a community anymore. And that's okay, because the community determines the direction that it's going, right? So for me, when I'm thinking about it from a brand perspective, if you know what you're rooted in and you know what you're about, as the tides and culture shifts and changes and things come and go, depending on the communities and the people that you're speaking to, you know where you stand. So it's kind of your filter to know when you want to jump in the conversation or not, or how you want to contribute or not. So it's a complicated one, because you always have to be paying attention. Sometimes it's unspoken, right? Where sometimes from a cultural perspective, you think about a community, there's elements of it that if you are part of the community, it's you don't speak about it. You either know, if you know, you know. So for a brand or even a marketer, it's really important to stay on top of it. And it's very important to know what you stand for to ensure that you don't get into muddy water. But it can be, it's a very impactful tool, but it also can be, you know, it can be dangerous at times if you're not clear with your objective.
Yeah. Well, and the paying attention part to me is something that I haven't, you know, again, when you're not in it every day, like you are with somebody like me, it's like, oh yeah, so you just need to understand who your audience is, who your target market is, and know what they, you know, like and don't like. But it's more than that, obviously. So how do brands, or you know, how should they be paying attention? I mean, it's not just, you know, reading trend pieces and monitoring social media conversations. I'm imagining it's probably, there's more to it than that.
Yeah, I mean, if you even think before internet and social media, I mean, brands had to ensure that they knew what was going on within those communities. So it's a mix of both, right? Where I do think, you know, the measurement and social chatter and measuring that is super important to see the conversations that are happening online, which is a free tool that all of us can utilize to go into those comment sections, to go into to understand what's happening. But there's another layer here of making sure that you are bringing in people from the perspectives and bringing in different perspectives and from those actual communities when you are trying to reach that, because they will know and be able to pick out and see, hey, there's something that you don't see here, or this is what's happening, or there's something that you wouldn't know because you didn't grow up in that community, or you're not from that community, or you're not part of that sports community that you just wouldn't know. So it really requires, it's, you know, what's interesting in this world of like AI right now and like everything that's happening, you're seeing more and more people put culture marketing and specifically seek out culture marketers, because it's a skill set to make sure that you're going out there and building these relationships and you know what's going on beyond, and that it's the layer beyond just the data.
Yeah. Well, and that's just an argument for a lot of things, right? It's an argument for diverse workforces so that you have different voices around that table. And also, again, just as you say, kind of reaching out, making sure that, you know, if you're going to do something, you are testing it and talking to the people that it's going to impact, rather than making assumptions or asking Claude or ChatGPT, do you think this will this will fly? Right? That's not going to work.
Yeah, it's wrong sometimes, right? And sometimes it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't have the cultural context of being in the actual communities or grow up in certain things. So that also adds a layer of, like, I'll give you an example. Like when you think about golf as a passion, but the golf community, right? So there's culture around golf. I've been learning how to golf, but I still don't know all of the details and all of the aspects. But if someone called me today and said, I want you to fully do a culture marketing focused strategy on golf, I could try and I could do it, but there are parts of it where I know from my skill set of the things that I need to build that and the formula to build that, but who I need to bring in and how to fill in those gaps. And specifically when you talk about knowing these communities and being a part of them, there are, again, unspoken rules. There's all of these things that you need to make sure that you have the right people at the table. They can quickly see through what surface level. If I put a golf strategy in front of someone who is a major golfer who golfs every single weekend, they're gonna know, oh, she's missing this, she's missing this. Ah, that's wrong. Oh, how that person's holding that club is wrong. Like there's just certain details that the community will only know, and they can easily tell when it's surface level and a general marketer is just trying to put a cultural marketing spin on something.
Yeah, and that's a great point, and that's one of the things, you know, we've talked about and we wanted to talk about today, because, you know, obviously, as I said, you know, the folks here, myself, you started out in kind of the what I'll just call, for our sake of our purposes today, kind of the traditional sponsorship arena, right? Sports and entertainment partnerships, you know, brands partnering with rights holders. You know, so sports and entertainment are obviously a big part of culture, right? They have their own cultures, like you mentioned with golf. But just because you are, you know, sponsoring something, you know, a sport, an event, whatever it is, that doesn't mean you're necessarily engaging in cultural marketing. And I think that's one of the confusions that we often see. And you mentioned specifically in our last conversation, that's what you defined, that kind of the sponsorship piece is more passion marketing, and that's why we titled this passion marketing versus cultural marketing, because again, we're all in the and speaking for the attendees, we're all kind of in the passion marketing business for sure. Some may be also in cultural marketing. So what would you say is the most important distinction between the two, between cultural marketing and passion marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I'll look at it from when we're thinking about music or sports, but I'll use sports specifically here. Sports, it's a passion, right? It's something's interest in them. Someone has interest. It's a hobby. It's what they're passionate about. That's what grabs their attention. So for me, and this personally for me, when I feel like you're starting with what people love, right? And you're focusing on it's sports, it's music, it's gaming. It's great for awareness. It's great for attention. It's great for positive association. There's great benefits when it comes to that. And hence why there's clearly a bunch of data points and information of why people are doing sports marketing, why people do music marketing, why they do marketing in gaming, because you are reaching that community. You're reaching someone when they're in their happy mode, right? They're engaged with something that they love. They want to tap in and watch the screen, right? So you want to intercept them at that moment. But there's another layer of it from a cultural marketing standpoint. And sometimes it overlaps, sometimes it doesn't, that it's going beyond just the passion itself, right? It's focusing on who are the people because of that passion. Why are they in that passion? What is the lifestyle behind it? What is the identity, the values, the behaviors, the community that is behind that? One that many people speak about is like the basketball culture and specifically basketball marketing, which could easily be sports marketing, right? But we all know there's a world around basketball when it comes to music and it comes to fashion, and it comes to even just lingo and everything in between. There is a whole community that is built around that. I mean, we saw that really loudly with like just the Knicks, right? It was beyond it was beyond the game. Right. And it's when you start to tap beyond, I love basketball, to who are you as a person that's within this community? And I'm starting to really go into the details of that emotion and that lifestyle behind it. So it's a little bit deeper.
Well, and to me, that's also, brings up, and I guess most of the folks joining us today are on what I call the property side of things, right? There are sports, entertainment, festivals, cultural organizations who are, want to build bigger and better brand partnerships. Yeah. To me, one of the most important things that the folks on that side of the coin can do is help brands, either current partners or prospects, understand why those people are buying their tickets, and not just who they are. As you said, we can pretty much identify their 18 to 34-year-olds or whatever the demographics, but why are they coming? And there will be different stories that people have as to what their connection is to this festival or to this sports team. And then how do you kind of unlock those stories to say, okay, now we've created a way for a brand to come in and be additive to the experience or whatever it may be. And is that, again, you've been on both sides of that coin. Is that fair to kind of put that onto the properties and say, you guys need to really know your audiences better than anybody else if you're going to be successful at asking a brand to come in and activate and sponsor and do all those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I think it helps frame it up as a long-term relationship of how you're building and being connected. And it also creates a way that when there is a brand so deeply connected to a property, it's hard to remove that. So I'll give you an example. Like when Pepsi moved away from the Super Bowl, there's a bunch of consumers that still think it's the Pepsi Super Bowl halftime show. And it's because you just had so many iconic moments in the cultural marketing and the talent that were around it. And yes, it's a years long thing. And we understand it was a long partnership, but when it's something that really gets in from like how it was programmed and from a cultural and all the cultural moments that happened while they were there, it adds the layers to it that it's harder to remove the brand from the property. It's harder to remove it from that audience as well. And I think when I flip it on like a property side, like it's a great benefit of saying, we're bringing you in and it's not something that we could just rinse and repeat and put another brand on this poster or on this screen, but it's something that's actually integrated within it.
Yeah. Well, this may be a little bit of an unfair question, but what's the most important thing that a property can bring to a brand in order to basically say, to demonstrate we know who this audience is?
Yeah. I think, I think the first thing that came to mind when you asked that was understanding the pain points. Of that audience, right? Because when a brand can actually come in and enter the conversation and solve something,
exactly,
or add something to the discussion that's like, hey, this is actually a problem, or this is something that they've actually vocalized a lot that maybe we haven't been able to solve, or no other brand is willing to address right now.
Right.
How would you bring that within your strategy? And when you're bringing that, proactively bringing that and saying no other brand can do this potentially besides you, or this is a completely open white space that you coming into this property and helping address this in some way will make you stand out. That to me, I feel like the consumer experience and what they feel and knowing what that is super, super, super helpful.
Yeah. I would totally agree with that. I mean, my first thing when I've worked with brands in the past, when we talk about how should we be leveraging this sponsorship, activating it, whatever it was, let's ask the question, would we be missed if we left, right? So it's a different spin on, what can we bring to the table that nobody else brings? My favorite example, kind of to what you were just talking about, from back in the day, I don't think it still exists, but Carlsberg beer used to sponsor a number of UK music festivals, the big music festivals that happen across England and Wales, and they had a cold beer or warm beer amnesty program, right? So if you're out at a festival, it's difficult to keep your beverages cold in the summer on a hot day. So you could literally at their tent, if you had half a beer and it had gotten warm, you could bring it back and they would give you a free cold one, that kind of a thing, within limits. But that was something, again, that those and it became in a way similar to the Pepsi example. It was something that was expected then every year. It's like, oh, I know that this is part of the experience of going to Cheltenham or whichever festival it was. And yeah, when they ended that partnership, I'm assuming that they did. I don't think it still goes on. I'm sure that first year there was probably like, well, what do you mean I can't get a free cold beer now because Carlsberg is no longer the sponsor? So that was, to me, that's the definition of, yeah, you've done something. You were in a unique position to enhance that experience, and you found that idea early on. So.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So again, we were talking about this confusion around cultural marketing, different definitions. So we kind of set up, one of those is there's a difference between passion marketing and cultural marketing, even if there's some overlap. To me, the other big thing that I think kind of muddies the waters, if you will, with when we talk about cultural marketing is I keep hearing brands talk about wanting to be or claiming to be culturally relevant. I would argue that well, you tell me, is it fair to say that a brand can be culturally relevant, but not necessarily a cultural marketer?
It's an interesting one. I think when you break that apart, I think there is also a little bit of a confusion between culturally relevant and popular and trendy. So I think sometimes that is also another layer of, again, within our industry, so many words are being utilized and used in different ways. So again, I will only speak for myself here. Is like, I think there's a difference between being culturally relevant and popular and trendy, and sometimes that gets blended. I think,
absolutely.
Is it possible to be culturally relevant without the intention of culture marketing? Yes. I actually think so. Doesn't always happen. But as we know, sometimes we wake up and something happened on TikTok and all of a sudden this brand that didn't even expect it has a whole new demographic and audience that cannot stop talking about them, right? And they have absorbed it from a cultural perspective, and it takes on a life of its own. So one thing that's interesting about culture as well is that when you think about communities, is communities will talk back, and they also will absorb and interpret things, right? So if you don't have an understanding of what you stand for or who you're trying to reach, or you're very specific, the broad messaging or the direction that you go could be like a casting net that you're going to bring in a bunch of different people and how it lands culturally with them.
Yeah.
And once that community absorbs that and translates that, how they absorb it and what they think of it and the narrative behind it now becomes part of the culture. So can you be culturally relevant without specifically doing it? Yes. I'll give you an example that I think is a really good one of that. Nike Air Forces. There's white and then there's black. Those Air Forces mean completely different things in culture. Nike didn't necessarily do that though. So for example, when you're wearing a white Air Force to a certain community, you're not supposed to crease it. It's not supposed to be dirty. It's supposed to be fresh. You heard it in rap songs. You know, some of the really good like leaders in culture were always wearing it, and you keep it fresh, you keep it clean. Then there was a whole other cultural perspective of the black Air Force Nikes that was, it almost was like you were a menace. It was you were ready to fight. Like if you wore black Air Forces, you were ready to fight. And Nike didn't do that, but the culture did that and decided based on what they saw and who was wearing it and how it was absorbed that can happen. So the black Nike Air Force became very culturally relevant in a very specific way to certain communities.
Sure.
And it wasn't necessarily driven by Nike itself, but the culture driven. So it's a long-winded way to say, yes, I think you can be culturally relevant and be part of the conversation and not even intentionally do it.
Yeah. And that's probably, most brands would kill to have the culture, the community, I should say, define a product like that and make that. And then you just, again, as the brands, you need to make sure that you're paying attention to that and recognizing that. And then kind of whatever you're doing when you're speaking about that particular product, making sure that it fits with how the community has already told you. And that's, the same with all brands, right? Brands are defined not by the owners, but by the community, the buyers, the customers, whoever it is. And I think for me, I agree with everything you said. I think where I get, I'm not going to say angry because it's not worth it, but it just, well, I'll give you an example that recently, and it was something that you and I talked very briefly about this as an example. I don't think we talked about this aspect. So Hennessy and LeBron James, and they last November, beginning of the NBA season, did what I call basically, kind of a stunt, right? It was like all of a sudden there was, on social media that LeBron James was going to have a new big announcement, and it was basically teased, and the idea was, oh gosh, is he leaving the Lakers? Is he going? This is after the move years ago from Cleveland to Miami. This is number 2, and it turned out it was a Hennessy promotion. Basically, it was the announcement and the move was that he was doing something new within the partnership for Hennessy, and they got some backlash from people who felt that it was not didn't like being kind of hoodwinked by that. But to me, it was a stunt, and it got them attention, and that's fine. What I really thought was odd was, and I wouldn't call anybody out by name, but there was an executive with Hennessy who was quoted at the time of saying, it was because it got huge just in terms of awareness and exposure and commentary on social media. It was very, very large. And this executive was really proud of that. And was like, this was, and he kept saying, Hennessy is culturally relevant. Look at me, because we've generated all of this awareness where there's a conversation around our brand now. And I thought, to me, there's a difference between, I can do lots of things for attention, right? I can walk out in front of my house and take my shirt off, and all of a sudden I'm going to be the talk of the neighborhood, right? Not for a good reason. But that, to me, that was the equivalent kind of what he was like, we just got a lot of attention. It's like, okay, there's some benefit to that, sure, but don't equate that to being culturally relevant just because people are talking about your brand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a complicated one. I think this is just my opinion, and I haven't looked at that piece of work in a while, so if I misspeak, apologize. But like, do I think they were doing culture marketing over like just general sports marketing? Yes, because I think they were inserting themselves in a very cultural moment in which we all remember the LeBron James decision. We all know there's a lot of sensitivity around when is he going to announce. We know there's a lot, that's the energy and the emotion. There's a lot around him as a person that's beyond the court. So I think it was successful in regards to it being a cultural marketing campaign that they were trying to do. I think my point of view, without looking at it fresh right now, is understanding what they wanted to get from it and what they wanted to contribute to the culture, and or what they were trying to uplift and be associated to doing that. And right now I can't think top of mind of exactly maybe what was that CTA or what they were trying to pay off of, what that meant for the brand, but maybe that's also very clear that I don't remember right now of like what exactly were they trying to pay off besides taking the emotions of the frustration around the decision. Now I will say, if they were trying to replicate the anger and the frustration that came from that decision in here, they did an excellent job, because it almost translated 1-to-1. So that was great. But I'll give another example, kind of flip back to you, that again, when we talk about culture, and it doesn't have to be good, it could be good or bad, right? It depends on what you stand for and what you're going into. And I'll give you an example of, I'll flip this, right? Think about the Sydney Sweeney and American Eagle.
Right.
Well, to some people, they didn't consider that culture marketing. I did, because it was specifically, they were focusing on something, right? Whether you agree with it and or not, they were focusing on something.
Okay.
Plus, they were trying to get a message and things, and they were fine with whatever came from it, assuming that they were very strategic on what they chose, but they were fine for whatever disagreements and stuff that were going to come out of it. So I think why that was also such a cultural moment, a cultural discussion around that campaign, because it caused so much dialogue and discussion, and they were willing to put that out, and they wanted to align and associate with that. And that was the culture that they were pushing and that they were fine with aligning with at that moment. So I hear what you're saying in regards to like, there's noise, there's also, but what are you standing for? I think that one versus like the Hennessy one, I could see a little bit more of like what they were trying to associate to the brand a little bit, and removing my thoughts of if I thought that direction was good or bad.
Yeah, and it's always a dangerous game to kind of try to assess, because again, we usually don't know all of the reasons behind it, unless if we're not working for that company or one of their agencies, we don't have all of that information.
Exactly.
And also, we may not be the members of the community that marketing is aimed at. So why I totally hear you that it's a little bit a little bit dangerous to try and assess things. Same with sponsorship. I always have the conversation. You see a deal announced and somebody will text me and be like, boy, why is company X spending $10 million to sponsor property Y? That makes no sense. It's like, it may not at first glance make sense, but we don't know everything that's going on there. I was just working with a client that really hasn't done much in sponsorship. And in fact, I constantly have a battle with this company's CMO, because he's really not a big fan of sponsorship in general, and doesn't think it's necessarily always right for their brand. And there were reasons behind that, and I won't get into the weeds with that. But all of a sudden, I get a memo that, hey, we're considering a pretty significant sponsorship. This is a non-US company in their market. And I was like, to me, like, just because I'm a sponsorship person, my first thought was like, great, you're finally doing something that I want you to be doing, because I think there's benefit. But I was also surprised. I'm like, okay, why are all of a sudden is this 360 shift coming around? And it was a very specific, even though this is a company that is both B2B and B2C, and this has B2C elements to it. It was done for a very specific kind of business back reason that you would not think about when you see it announced. And you might question, like, wow, that's a pretty, for the size brand they are, that's a pretty big investment. But it was very clear when they explained it to me. It's like, oh yeah, you're going to make money on this. Again, I don't know why I went down that track, but again, just from the reasons of, it's always difficult to assess something when you're on the outside, because you never really know all of the elements of any program.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So it all goes back to intention or not. Were you culture marketing? Were you not? What was the intention behind it? But one thing is clear, no matter what, once a community gets a hold of it, how they interpret it is going to be how they interpret it. Like, sometimes the perception is going to be reality, right? So it is something in regards to, knowing if you're going into something, and to focus on passion marketing and sports marketing, and really focusing on that and like the love of the passion, or are you trying to go in a different direction? Sometimes people don't know which way they're going, and that can also get dangerous territory, because you have to be very intentional if you go on that side, because again, the culture can just take it and go with it. And if you made deliberate choices, it helps guide the conversation versus letting it kind of go, and it can go in any direction.
Yeah. Well, and that's another piece for the folks on the property side, to try and make sure that they understand what is the brand's intention, right? And I think sometimes it may be seen as a difficult conversation to have. Like, look, you're excited that you have this partner on board. You want to start talking about all of the great things you're going to do together. And it's not necessarily always comfortable to be like, but let's sit down and really discuss, like, what are the priorities here? What's the intention? What are the objectives? But that's a critical conversation to have if you're going to really help a brand, do something good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you have to understand what the brand wants, right? Yeah. Like, is it specifically focused on reach and impressions, and more from where they are at in the funnel? Or are they trying to look at something long term where they really want to get into like the values and the identity and solve things? Like, it really it depends. And not one way is right or wrong, but understanding that, and also understanding why is that brand there? How are they authentically contributing? Do they have a right to enter certain conversations or be somewhere and or not? Nothing is worse than seeing a brand that's not meant to be there just kind of pollute the space. How does the community feel about you? Like, are they welcoming you? What are they open to receiving as well? So there's a lot of things that I think it helps smooth out the process and ensure like a brand and our partner feels like they're getting the value, and also can foresee any type of hiccups down the road, and be very strategic and thoughtful of how they go into space, versus looking at their brand or their business goals and forgetting that the consumer and the fan experience still comes first, and that should be a priority of how your brand contributes to that.
Yeah. And is that, we talk about hiccups and trying to anticipate, as we've kind of talked about, it's easy to misstep with cultural marketing. There's some minefields there. Are there specific things that whether it's on the brand side or the property side that you can try and do to avoid making mistakes, other than kind of the basics of, understand who the community is and understand who you are as a brand? Are there any other kind of, whether it's strategic or tactical kinds of things to be thinking about when you're embarking on something in the cultural marketing space?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is entering and speaking to communities that you don't understand without doing the due diligence of it. I think there can be some blinders on of thinking that your perspective is the community's or the fans' perspective. I think, making creative choices with the understanding of their meaning, that's another one that I think we've probably seen always in our industry. Like, it was the color of this or how this was positioned or who you casted, then all of a sudden it took on a life of its own, right? And I think, from even from a can line perspective, I recently spoke about how a lot of the campaigns that we were looking at when we were looking at impact and culture specific work, every piece of the creative was intentional, right? It didn't leave anything for interpretation. Like, there's a reason. It's who they were calling out to, who they were speaking to. If you knew, if you know, you know. If you didn't know, that's fine. But if you knew exactly why they made that choice, and you almost felt like part of the conversation of that. So I think understanding your creative choices, and that when sometimes it's not rooted in intention, it's just like, let's just do this, or let's just put this here. That's when it can leave room for some risks of that. And then just forgetting just how communities could interpret your work, and just making sure that they're part of the discussion as well. And that you're listening to feedback. And I think those are some of the bigger ones that I think, where we see, culture marketing specifically, and when we go into passions like sports and music, where it can go left, is when it's interpreted the wrong way, or there wasn't an intention behind it, and then you have to try to explain why in the background. And it's like, with everyone's focus going in like 1 second or one headline, it's
Right.
it's gone after that.
Yeah. Let me just remind everybody, if you have a question, now would be the time to throw it in as we get close to the end of our time with Bree. Please feel free to pop any questions that you have in the Q&A. Also, this is just something that occurred to me. I was looking at who's with us today, and a lot of folks are working in single markets or working with local organizations. It's natural to kind of default to talking about global campaigns and big cultural moments that are kind of happening across countries and across the world. But there is, let me phrase this as a question. I'm assuming there's a space for cultural marketing even on the local level, and I'm thinking of some of the things I remember that you did again when you had your agency and doing a lot of stuff here in Chicago. So is that again fair to say that cultural marketing does not have to be national or global? It can be local.
Yeah, I would even reply to say it starts there.
Yeah.
Because the community and the experience and just who you're talking to, like, it starts on the ground. That's where culture is made. That's where the community is. It's not from a big brand level. Like, brands can impact culture, can guide culture, can contribute, can take from it, can contribute to it. But ultimately, it's at that ground level. It's from a local level. And there are brands, even from a global perspective, huge brands that have started from a very local approach and then kind of expanded from there. So I think size of the brand and or global or local, I don't think matters. I just think knowing what your brand or your focus stands on and how you want to reach out to your community is the most important.
We got a question from Adam, and I think this is a really relevant question. When you are representing a brand, working for a company, and you've worked for obviously big international brands in your two most recent positions, you've got, obviously it's not a sole audience, right? That is that you can define. You have lots of different demographics and interests and different cultures in there. So Adam's question specifically is, how does a brand or a company like that decide which direction to kind of, you can't probably do everything for everyone, right? Nobody's got the budgets to do as much as the potential is out there. So how do you decide which kind of direction to take partnerships and cultural marketing in?
Yeah, I think it's starting with the brand. and their product or service and knowing what you are about and how you want to push that out to the world. I think a really good example is Red Bull. I'll give you an example of that, right? Energy drink. Everyone drinks an energy drink, right? Sure. I'm sure they have multiple different targets and audiences within there, but it's very clear for them when they're like, I give you wings, pushing human potential, rebellious, go do something wild, take the risk, kind of danger. We know energy drinks aren't water. So there is an energy to it. There is a feeling to when you consume one, and they know that about their product as well. They lean into it. So it's consistent where they know I stand for take things to the extreme, keep going, risk over, take some risk, there's reward, great stories, all that type of stuff that's connected to that ethos, right? That I'm sure they can communicate way better than me, right? Mm-hmm. And then they take that and they say, what audiences, what parts of culture also align with this kind of push it to the max type experience? So you see them show up in skydiving or breakdancing or in nightlife and like raves and like deep within that community. Like you see where they take what they care about and what they are about from a cultural perspective, and they say, what communities and what audiences align with me? And it goes beyond demographics. It goes beyond specific passion points. They focused on the actual cultural insight, which again, I don't know the specific one, but we're giving you wings, push it. Like, it's okay to push it. It's okay to be a little extreme, and you see extreme and kind of rebellious in everything that they do. So that's a really good example of not just focusing on the audience first or just trying to force yourself in the conversation, but what does my brand care about? And given that, where can I authentically fit? And then they're capturing so many people within that because that cultural insight is across many different groups.
Yeah. And I would add too, also on a very practical level, with Adam's question, and again, something that I was recently talking to a brand about. There are things, and again, you don't see this from the outside, and it would be so helpful if you were pitching these brands and you knew exactly the conversations they've been having over the last 6 months, because something can happen where it's like, and again, this is a live example from a brand that I know. All of a sudden, it's a shift, and again, it's outside the country, so I'll mention it briefly. Airline, where it was like we were concentrating, all of it totally on consumer tourism, tourist market, and something happened, economically, socially. A competitor did something where all of a sudden we now need to focus on the business customer. So what can we do right now? So that can then make that shift. It's like all of a sudden now we're going. That's a key finding, and sometimes it's geographical. It's like we're losing market share in Texas and California, so we're going there. So they're all there's so many factors that can tend to change that, and it makes it challenging for both sides, right? Because there are constantly things that are shifting in terms of the audience and the priorities.
100%. I mean, I feel like it needs to be rooted in what's the top business priority at that moment, and which helps you kind of focus, being like, here are the main priorities. We are losing this audience, or we need to keep this audience, or we see a competitor going after this audience and we want to get to it first. Like, there's plenty of reasons behind it. Like, culture marketing specifically can be very proactive, right? It's not always, it can be defensive, it can be proactive, but how you utilize it can help you, depending on your business focus, utilizing that data, utilizing that information, your business reason, and then going deep within it, right? And then as your strategy changes, you're like, okay, I might have to get off of this, I might have to switch onto that. But that's where the data is super helpful too, to determine where's the bright spots, where are the holes, and where can culture marketing specifically be utilized to either plug up a hole or make a bright spot even bigger.
Yeah. And I'll go back and just on the practical level too, that's where if you're on the property side, those relationships that you have, that any relationship you can form with companies that are either your current partners or prospective partners, of the ones that are at the top of your list, just so you can maybe get a bit of that conversation, even if it's over coffee, like, hey, what's going on with you guys now? Nobody's going to share proprietary information, but somebody might give you a little bit of direction, like, well, we're really focusing on, again, this segment, this geographic area. And so, building your networks and doing that kind of legwork. I mean, that's where you start to be able to get a little bit of insight that's going to make it easier for you to say, hey, we can help you out with that. We've got something going on where I think we could support what your brand is trying to do. So always trying to give some practical advice to my sales friends out there, my sellers out there. But just real quick, Bree, as we come to the end of our time, and again, if you have any more questions, feel free to throw them in. We've talked about a couple of examples. RedBull is a great one. Anybody else that you see out there that's just kind of, you would say, is getting culture marketing right, is doing it particularly well at this point?
Yeah, I'll leave my own current brand out of it because I don't want to be biased here.
I'll say it. I think it's easy. They go, obviously, great stuff. We're all familiar with it, but.
Yes, we are doing great right now, I think, from a cultural perspective, and we're, as you can see, our World Cup and everything that we're doing in regards to around there and how we're showing up in F1, like, we're really integrating ourselves into those communities. So I'd say outside of that, I think Adidas is really interesting right now. I think everything happening in the footwear space, how they're specifically leaning into Latin culture. And the lifestyle, from the talent to the sports to the music, like, they're really building a really interesting universe around there and really sticking to it. So I'd say Adidas. Okay.
Yeah. Smart company. And I mean, that space is just fascinating to watch. It always has been, not always for good reasons. There have been some really interesting marketing missteps made by some brands in that space, but also some, like, boy, knock it out of the park and really doing well. Just a couple of other things for me. The one thing that I've been focused on a lot in my career, so I tend to ask this question no matter what I'm talking about, is kind of that whole measurement and evaluation. Had a lot of conversations around how do you successfully evaluate performance in sponsorship, and a lot of brands still struggle with that. Is it similar with cultural marketing in terms of kind of saying, hey, these are the ways to really evaluate whether these things are working? Are there key metrics that you see or that you use to measure success of cultural marketing programs?
Of course. I mean, it's always going to be a discussion, and sometimes it's not as fast and direct as you want, because culture marketing is a very long-term goal, and it builds over time, and then you start to see kind of reaping those rewards from those actions that you're taking. But I think there's really some there's not a boxed approach, I think, to approaching culture marketing, and I'm very vocal about that there's not like a one-step approach, or this is how you measure it, and so that's not even doable. It has to be pretty, and so I push back when people say, oh, I have a whole culture marketing measurement plan. It's like, can you really, like, you have to tailor it. So how does that look? So I say you're looking at brand perception, you're looking at brand sentiment, those type of studies, those brand lift studies. You're looking at earned media and organic as well, of like what is happening in those spaces, and how is the communities and the media and the publications and the influencers and how are they interpreting you, and are they interpreting you in the right way? Clearly community engagement, making sure you're tracking and doing social listening to understand what's happening there, and that's also helping guide your strategy. I think another really important one is audience and consumer data and demo, is understanding who are you bringing into your brand,
right,
when you do something. with every action, there is a reaction. And I feel like with culture marketing, you're either bringing people in or you're pushing people out. So you start to see that slowly of understanding the decisions and choices that you made, whether it was deliberate and or not, who's coming into your brand, who's walking into the store, who's going online and buying something, who's using your service. And you start to realize maybe the things that I'm doing, whether intentional or not, you're curating people and you're speaking to people and it's calling certain people in. Additionally, on top of that is the retention behind that too. Are they coming back?
Right.
That's really also important as well. So that's something that, like, when you start to talk to people that are really focused on like the product side or like the sales side and making sure that's a little bit more down the funnel, those are some data points to look at to understand how culture marketing is impacting who's coming into the brand, who's buying or using services. So yeah, I think, and then just the general cultural association. What are you being associated with? And that social chatter and social media is very important to that. So because now you start to see what conversations you're in the midst of, and if you want to be in those conversations.
Awesome points there. I always wrap up our webinars with a question, a category of questions I call myth to bust or fact to trust. So basically, true or false. So for you, I think the question that first comes to mind regarding that would be, is this statement a myth or a fact? Every brand should be engaging in cultural marketing. Because what I often, again, we talk about, my clients with the airlines and stuff, and people saying, why aren't you involved in sponsorship? You should be. But there are, times where I have advised brands, no, you shouldn't necessarily, based on what your objectives are. Sponsorship is not really where you need to be spending your marketing dollars. So similarly, is cultural marketing something that is appropriate or good for every brand, or not
really? Ooh, that's a hard one. It depends on the cultural positioning and what you're willing to do and not do, right? Oh, I know I'm supposed to answer this myth or bust, but truth. But
you can go in the middle, and everything. Not everything.
I'm gonna go in the middle. I think. Yeah, I think, in my point of view, I think every brand should be doing passion-focused marketing and making sure you're connecting people's interests and that you are there and you're part of that, because that could be from various, just consideration or awareness at this point, and that's just, it's 2026. But I think from a cultural marketing perspective, that is a little bit deeper, and sometimes requires you to signal certain things. So I'd say it depends. It depends on the product. It depends on the service. It depends on the brand. Some brands have chosen to stay more sponsorship and put my logo on certain things, and I don't get involved in conversations. And that could be insurance brands or banks that don't want to get involved with other conversations. They just want to be seen and keep top of mind, and that's okay.
Right.
So yeah, I think it just depends.
Okay. Terrific. Well, Bree, thank you so much. Again, I know you've got a ton on your plate, and really appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to talk about this. Like I said, it's always a fun conversation. It's always terribly enlightening for me. I'm sure it was for our audience. So on behalf of my friends at Sponsor CX, just want to thank you for joining us. Want to thank everybody who was with us live today for joining us. Hope you got something out of the conversation for whatever you're working on and working in. So again, appreciate the time, and we'll leave it there. And hopefully we'll see all of you on our next webinar. Like, I should remind everybody, you'll be hearing about this. We do have our next Sponsor CX webinar is on July 29th. So that's 2 weeks from tomorrow. We're going to be joined by Steven Anderson from Gamebridge, who is doing some really great stuff. And what we've been talking about in passion marketing, they have an amazing portfolio across WNBA, IndyCar, a lot of other stuff. And he's going to talk about how they kind of balance all of that. And It'll be, I think, a nice conversation to have. We really get some insights on a brand and a marketer that's really doing some new and interesting stuff. So hopefully you'll be able to join us, look in your emails and look on LinkedIn for the promotions around that. So again, Bree, thanks so much. Great to see you. Go enjoy your Tuesday evening in Copenhagen, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.